Okay, so as Rebecca mentioned, my name is Benjamin. Funny enough, when I had originally committed to do this event, I was working with Futurepreneur Canada. So I have a lot of experience in that industry, but I'm no longer with Futurepreneur. I had started a side hustle last year and had been building that outside of my full-time job. And it had really taken off at the beginning of this year, and it was time to transition out. That being said, I'm here to really talk about entrepreneurship, and igniting your startup and how to finance your business. Now, I think a key piece before we get started is that little land acknowledgement, like Rebecca had mentioned. I'm located in Vancouver and wanted to acknowledge that I'm situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I think it's also important to clarify that the term unceded acknowledges the dispossession of the land and the inherent rights of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people of the territory. This is a little bit about Hive Growth Partners. I don't want to talk too much about my business, but I'm happy to talk about entrepreneurship. But really, our goal at Hive is to connect you with the resources you need to build your own self-sustaining hive. We really try and combine the best traditional business theory through a modern approach to keep up with the fast-paced, ever-changing business environment. And I think this is kind of the benefit of where I've been at in my career, and I think where my professional experience has led me, that I have the old school kind of theoretical approach from my education, but then I'm also in the business landscape day in and day out. So I kind of bring this blended experience of theory and practical experience as well to entrepreneurs like everybody in the room today. Ideation and problem solving is really at the core of what we do, and it's kind of been at the core of what I've been about my entire life, where I like coming up with unique innovative solutions to problems, whether they're in business or that whether they're in life. And I also pride myself on my communication, and I think that's largely the strength of Hive Growth Partners as well. So we really try and have open communication. We're going to try and foster that today, and really working with individuals to figure out what their unique needs are. And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges with a presentation like this. Excuse me. I think that's really one of the biggest challenges with a presentation like this, because there's so many different sources of funding available, but each of them are unique depending on each of them is a unique solution depending on the type of business that you're actually in. Now, the way that we actually work, and this is kind of a unique, I want to tell a little bit of a story about Hive specifically, because it kind of intertwines in my professional experience as well, is that we were actually founded on an opportunity in the industry where we felt like a lot of large marketing and consulting agencies that were trying to bring every service under one roof were over promising, under delivering, and overcharging their clients. And what was happening a lot of the time early on in my career is I was actually hiring these marketing and consulting agencies to execute the work, and then my integrity was put on the line when they wouldn't deliver. And so what my business partner and I started discussing a couple of years ago was that the reality is that when you bring everything under one roof, it kind of it impacts the quality of service you're able to offer, and it takes away the personable relationship that's often needed in any kind of consulting or advising position. And so what we did instead is we said, well, what if we were to just connect entrepreneurs like everybody in the room, or small business owners, with other independent small businesses or entrepreneurs that offer a service but can't do that full suite of services. So for example, if somebody needs their website developed, we have somebody in our network who handles the front end user design and interface of it. But then we also have somebody in our network who's a separate business that does the back end development of the website as well. So really, we're trying, like I mentioned, we're trying to connect you with the resources you need to build, but we're also trying to help support these small to medium sized businesses. Now, that plays a little bit into myself as well. Just a little bit of background. I'm originally from Alberta. I've been in the Lower Mainland since last September, but I work closely with over 300 entrepreneurs and small businesses in both the startup and the growth phases. The startup phases are generally what I was working on doing at Futurepreneur, whereas the growth phases is usually where I'm kind of focused now in my own advising group too. And largely my role in business development actually started in community engagement and development. So I was approached by a lot of businesses that said, we have this amazing product or service. We need to be able to engage our community. They weren't calling them customers at that point. And it was really focused on building a community feel to a lot of dedicated fans and followers to a business or their product or service, and being able to develop it. So it's not just how do we find 20 people who are huge fans of the product or business. How do we actually grow that 20 to 50 and then to 100 and really scale a sustainable business where we have a consistent funnel of existing customers coming to the business to support it, and then also new customers that weren't aware of the business before. So that's a little bit about me and Hive. Now, I'm curious, I actually wasn't able to see how many participants we have in the room today. I know that everybody's muted, so this approach is a little bit different, but is everybody comfortable, or is everybody able to share what their business currently is or what their business's idea is in the chat? Generally, as everybody's kind of writing their own responses, I try and make these sessions as engaging as possible, so you're not listening to me speak for about 45 minutes. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what your business idea is or what your business currently is in the chat. And it kind of goes back to what Hive is built on, is it kind of allows me to better convey solutions that might be actually applicable to you or your business moving forward.
I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat, Benjamin, but Noah is looking into mobile car detailing business.
Mm-hmm. No, I believe you were actually in a session that I was working on earlier this year as well. So I'm curious, maybe at the end, for you to share a little bit some of the successes or challenges you've had since we last connected. Now, while everybody's doing that, like I said, you can pop your business idea or your current business in the chat. But one of the ways I understand that this presentation is largely based around financing, and we're going to talk about that. But the reality is that it's impossible to separate entrepreneurship from the financing aspect. So I like talking a little bit about entrepreneurship on the front end of the presentation, because I really think it's important to truly understand that this is something that you want to do and that why you're passionate about it before you go and reach out for financing. So what I often look at is, what does success look like? And now, success is subjective to a lot of people, depending on what your goals and your hopes and dreams are. So what I did is I went to ChatGPT, the most objective tool I think that we can get, and I asked it what it thought success was. And it said success is a subjective concept that can mean different things to different people. It's usually defined by an achievement or desired outcome or goal. And then it kind of shares a little bit about what some accomplishments might look like. Now, if success is objective, we often also have to look at the other end of it. So what is failure? Failure is the opposite of success and can be defined as not achieving a desired outcome or goal. So failure is a natural and inevitable part of life, and everyone experiences it at some point in their lives. Now, the reason that I like bringing it up is because we often are afraid to actually, we have a ton of great business ideas, but the hardest part that I've experienced working directly with entrepreneurs and small to medium sized business owners is actually starting. And the reason I think a lot of the time is because there's this fear of failing. But the reality is, and the question is can we actually succeed or fail without trying in the first place? And so I went back to ChatGPT, and it says success or failure usually implies an outcome that is achieved or not achieved through some level of effort or action taken towards a goal or objective. Therefore, it is not possible to succeed or fail without trying at all. And I think one piece, the reason I like bringing this up is because I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow and then start your own business. What I'm suggesting is that you can be calculated in your risk, but the reality is you're never truly going to find out whether you can be successful as an entrepreneur or your business can be successful without actually trying. And I think this is usually the biggest holdup for a lot of people. Now, I also want to clarify that despite a number of events, I've been involved in a number of different events over the last 10 or 15 years in my career, and especially in the startup ecosystem. And everybody wants to tell you that there's one right way or one wrong way to do something. I'm here to be an advocate of both, is that I don't think that there's right or wrong in entrepreneurship because every pathway is different. There's only different perspectives. Now, the reality is that there's a higher likelihood if you were to do something one way because of a proven track record that you're going to be successful if you follow that path. But I just want to be wary that nothing that I say today is outright the way it needs to be done. I'm just sharing what my personal experience, so that blended personal, professional experience with my academic background. And I just want to be able to bring it and share it with you, everybody in the room today. Now, this is what most people think entrepreneurship looks like. You have a big idea, someone gives you some money, you build it, and then you have an overnight success. Now, I want to temper expectations that the reality is this is actually what it looks like with entrepreneurship. You start, you fail, you're insecure, you work hard, you fail some more, life happens, you get lots of help, and then to everybody else, it seems like it was an overnight success. But the reality is this was not a linear path. It wasn't this straight up and down. It was kind of this back and forth. Now, the reason that I like showing this as well is because I think the reality is that entrepreneurship really is a lifestyle. And the reason I want to bring it up is because if it's linear, where you have a big idea, someone gives you money, and it's this easy pathway, you don't really have to check back in with yourself and, see if something aligns with your personal values of beliefs, or see if you're truly passionate about running this business or being your own, or whether you're accountable enough to actually be your own boss. And I think the reality is you need to have that internal compass of values and beliefs in order to make sure that when you're kind of going back and forth, you're going 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, that you actually know what that true purpose is and that life's purpose is that's going to keep you grounded and moving forward towards the end of this goal. So I think it's really important to consider what will actually bring you fulfillment. Now, there's a theory, there's a bunch of different theories out here. This is generally one that's helped me throughout my career. This is one that's generally helped me throughout my career, but it's called Ikigai. And essentially what Ikigai is, it's a cross between your passion, your mission, your profession, and vocation. And then it's also a blend of what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can actually be paid for. Now, at the center of all of these is your Ikigai. So loosely translated, it's what your purpose is. Going to include your values. The other one's going to include things you like to do. And then the other one's actually going to include things that you're good at. The cross section of these three lists.
Hi, Ben. So
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but
it's okay.
I think you might have lost sound for a second.
Oh,
So maybe
can you
if
hear
you
me?
want to just, yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Was my video still okay?
Yeah, your video was okay. I think we were
Oh,
just
interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So maybe
Okay.
if you could just go back to what you were saying before about Ikigai.
Yeah, sure. When did the volume drop out? Was it in this first line up top?
It was roughly when you were saying uh the first line, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So loosely translated, Ikigai is your purpose or the reason you wake up every morning. And so what I did was I doubled back to this and I said the reality is that when things get difficult and you're 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, it's really important to know what's going to wake you up every morning because it can be quite challenging. Now, you can use Ikigai really in any kind of situation where you need to identify whether something is a smart decision or you need to mitigate some of your risks. So I wrote here that it could be considering a new job, a project, or investment. It could also be personal relationships like family challenges. It's really just a great tool to check in with yourself and then make a decision that's based on those internal values and beliefs. So you can actually make 3 lists: your values, things you like to do, and the things you're good at. And then the cross section of those 3 lists is your Ikigai. Now, the key to all of this is that it's great if you actually identify what your ikigai is, but it's trying to figure out what an outlet is for that ikigai. Um, and so it acts almost as purpose in action. So for example, if you come up with what your ikigai is, you want to make sure that you're choosing a job or a business or an entrepreneurial path that's going to be able to fulfill those passion, missions, professions, and vocations that you've identified. Okay. And like I said, people think it looks like that first one, but the reality is it looks like that second one. Now, I want to talk a little bit about types of entrepreneurship before I actually get into the financing. So there's really 4 types. There's small business entrepreneurship. This is the majority of businesses. Think realtors, consultants, plumbers. I would be considered a small business entrepreneur. They're usually run by individuals. And then financing usually comes from profits, loans, friends, and family. You have scalable startup entrepreneurship. These are usually industry disruptors like Airbnb, Amazon, Google, venture capitalists financing to prove market fit. Then you have large company entrepreneurship. These are usually established businesses that invest in small projects to continue innovating. Another word for this is called intrapreneurship. So it's the idea that there's innovation or entrepreneurship within a company. Ideas often come from within that company. And then there's social entrepreneurship. It's usually focused on social needs, poverty, homelessness, hunger. Company structure varies from one organization to the next. I just want to touch on the social entrepreneurship piece because it's kind of a trend that I've seen working with a lot of entrepreneurs. I think the reality is that you can have a socially based entrepreneurial venture and it doesn't necessarily need to be a nonprofit organization. The reality is that you can be a socially based entrepreneurial business as long as you're giving back to the causes that you believe in. Okay. So I just want to touch on the entrepreneurial pathway, and this is going to kind of highlight when you may or may not need financing for a business. So really, the first step in any kind of business is the ideation and the research. So you come up with some sort of business idea. It's usually by brainstorming or some sort of cross between your interests, your skills, or you've identified some sort of market. And then you also have to do the research. You can have a great business idea that works for you, but the important piece is to try and research and figure out if it's going to work for a bunch of other people as well. The second step is actually the planning stage. So this is when you'll do a business plan, often cash flow projections or basic financial projections is included in this. You'll go over startup costs, expected revenue. It's really designed to say you have a great business idea. Now, if I was to build a plan, can it actually be successful? If you feel like the product or service or the business in general can be successful, then that's when you'll actually move forward with business registration, usually before you get some sort of financing. And this is when you'll get license or permits based on the type of business or industry that you're in and the location that you're going to be operating in. The next step is actually launching. So it's, setting up basic operations. It usually includes marketing and sales. But really high level, this is a really simplified format. Really high level, this is generally what the entrepreneurial path looks like. Now, when you're looking for financing for a business, it's really important to consider whether you're actually building to keep the business or sell the business. And this can often be nuanced for a lot of people because most people who are entrepreneurs or thinking about building the business, they're usually looking at building a business for themselves for cash flow and not actually with the idea of harvesting it or selling it down the road. But how much debt or financing or anything that you take on initially for the business, it's important to consider when, depending on what the decision down the road is to actually keep or sell. So there's really two scenarios. It's building for the cash flow or you're building to sell. Now, building for cash flow, this usually gives you some sort of steady income. So this is really designed where you want to make a career or a job for yourself. So you start a business because you want some cash flow actually coming in. Businesses like this are usually lower risk because they often take less of a financial investment upfront in order to run it. So my business is a good example. I've bootstrapped pretty much all of it. The service I've tried to minimize my overhead or fixed expenses to make sure that any of the income or revenue that's coming into Hive Growth Partners, I can then actually use moving forward. I also have more control over my business and businesses that you own where it's a cash flow based business, you're going to have more control over the decision making. The reality is that when you're building to sell, you're usually going to have to sell a portion of the company and you're going to sacrifice some of the control of that business. The other piece is there's limited upside. Now, this isn't the case for all businesses that you're building for cash flow, but the general rule of thumb is that there is limited upside because in order to create upside, you have to spend money. So it's that old age saying where you have to spend money to make money. So building for cash flow generally has limited upside. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be profitable or that you're not going to be making money or you're not going to be able to run a successful business that puts you through your entire life. It just means it may not be that Amazon or that Airbnb type of model, type of unicorn that we often see in a lot of entrepreneurial circles. There's less flexibility. The reality is that if you're building for cash flow, you're going to have a smaller operations and you're going to be less flexible. You're going to have to take on more responsibility. Now, if you're building to sell, there's the potential for the large payout, right? So you're going to build a business, you're going to build up that unicorn, and then you're just going to be able to sell and move on to the next one. It's more flexible of a business model. The reality is that the majority of companies that are built to sell are larger organizations. And when you have more cash flow coming in or more operating cash in the business, you're going to have more flexible of a business model moving forward. Really, these businesses are often focused on innovation. Now, this isn't mutually exclusive. If you're building a business for cash flow, you can also focus on innovation. But generally, if you're building to sell, you want to make sure that the tool is as innovative and creative as possible before trying to sell it to somebody else. Usually, if you're building to sell, there's a bigger investment. So there's a high risk of failure and there's a longer time horizon. And specifically with the longer time horizon, again, that's also not the case. Sometimes you could be building a business for cash flow. It could take off right away, and then there isn't a longer time to actually harvest and sell. But the reality is, if you're building to sell and you were to take some sort of upfront investment in order to scale it, you can usually scale the first part of it quicker, but it's going to take longer to actually get to the point of selling it. So I think it's also important to highlight some of the differences of each. So the exit strategy differs from each. So when building a business to sell, the entrepreneur needs to have a clear exit strategy in mind from the outset. This is extremely important and it's often overlooked a lot of the time with entrepreneurship because most of the time at the beginning, we're just focused on making it work. But knowing what your exit strategy is at the beginning is going to help clarify and really dictate some decisions within the business as you continue to scale and grow. Financial projections are going to look different. So it'll really differ depending on whether the business is planning to sell or if you're building for cash flow. So for example, if you're planning on building a business to sell, you might have a secondary income. You might not actually have to take payroll off of the business that you're looking to sell. Whereas if you're building it for cash flow, the reality is that's what's going to bring in your money and that's what's your main source of income. So you're not going to be able to keep as much in the business. The marketing strategy changes. So when building a business to sell, the entrepreneur needs to focus on building a brand that will be attractive to potential buyers. Whereas the reality is that if you were just building for cash flow, you're really just focusing your marketing on building, your customer base and increasing your revenue. Product development is another one as well. It needs to be focused on creating a unique and scalable product or service that will appeal to potential buyers. So for example, if you're a consultant or a plumber, you don't really need to do anything unique and scalable product. You might just offer really great customer service and you might take on most of the work, but it's something to consider because if you can't scale it, then you're likely not going to be able to sell it at the end of the day. Risk management is the other piece as well. There's risks associated with investing heavily in research and development, marketing, and building a team. I was actually involved in a tech-based startup just over 10 years ago that we actually suffered from this as well. The goal was to build it up and to sell it. And the reality is there was a lot of money that got put into the research and development of the product, but there was a lack of understanding on how you were actually going to market it and sell it down the road. That business ended up going under, and here I am today. So this is kind of what's different between both of them. Now, it's important to consider that an idea without a plan is only a wish. And I think this is really important, is that as entrepreneurs, we're generally full of ideas and the ideas are great, but the reality is we have to put pen to paper and actually come up with a business plan and figure out whether we're going to operate to create cash flow or if we're going to actually operate to sell. So I think it's important to consider is when do businesses actually need financing? So often this is when starting a new business. So if you have a large fixed expense, so a common thing that I experienced when I was in the lending space was needing an investment for equipment, needing a vehicle for the business, needing inventory. If you're starting a new business, sometimes you need that injection of cash flow to start. You might be expanding an existing business. You might need to purchase inventory, like I mentioned. Covering operating expenses. So especially during COVID, this was something that we commonly saw, was that there were a lot of people who were struggling and were actually finding it very challenging to cover basic operating expenses like rent or wages. Investing in technology is a big piece. AI is kind of the new craze right now. There's a lot of public grants and subsidies available for this, and really they're focused on allowing businesses to adopt AI technology in their business. Marketing and advertising is a big piece. Now, you kind of get what you pay for with marketing and advertising, but it can be a black hole. It's important to make sure that we're using the marketing and advertising dollars responsibly. You might also be acquiring another business. So you might currently have a business where maybe it's actually built for cash flow, but maybe acquiring this other business will give you the opportunity to maybe sell the entire business moving forward. So you might want to look at making a personal investment and obtain some financing in order to acquire that business. Okay. So we've touched on it a little bit, but today's really not about business planning. But I really just wanted to touch on the importance of creating a business plan, is that it really is the future path for your business. Now, this comes up not just with the entrepreneurs that I work with, but also the small to medium-sized business owners. Is a lot of them tell me that they built a business plan at the beginning and then they don't go back to it after year 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what I usually actually encourage a lot of these entrepreneurs and business owners that I work with is to go back to the original business plan, because it almost never looks like how they drew it up in the business plan. And the reason I encourage them to go back is because it's really important to say that if that original plan that we had come with looks drastically different than where we stand 2, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road, that we're revising that business plan, because it almost acts as a compass. Similar to the image that I had showed at the beginning of the presentation, when things kind of get cloudy and confusing, it's really important to have something that's going to ground you and point you in the right direction, especially as an entrepreneur. So this business plan really acts as the future path for your business. Now, again, I also mentioned earlier that there isn't right or wrong, it's only different perspectives. You're going to find a million different business plan templates on Google if you were to search, or even there's some that are built into Microsoft Word. There is no right or wrong way to design or structure a business plan, but generally the content does stay the same, and the content required when looking for financing is about the same. So really, you're going to have to write a company profile. What makes your company valuable? Do a little bit of market research. So what industry are you in and who are your customers? Sales and marketing. What's the best marketing strategy for your business? Operations. What do you actually need to start your business? Financials, how can you achieve and sustain financial success? So these are usually the five core pieces of a business plan. And if you don't already have a business plan, I would encourage everybody to write one. The first draft is almost never perfect. And like I mentioned, the first draft that you actually use to apply for financing almost never looks the same 3, 4, or 5 years down the road. Okay. So this is really, I mentioned some situations of when you might need financing, but these are designed really to highlight a couple pieces along the timeline when you can actually say this might be a good time when I actually need financing. So you need to invest in growth. So you might be needing to expand your business. You're struggling with that cash flow that I mentioned. So if you're ever finding it difficult to meet your financial obligations, it might be time. You want to take advantage of opportunities. So this is that acquisition that I mentioned as well. This might be a really good chance. Or you're having trouble getting approved for credit. Now, this, I think, is actually, here, I'll talk about the last one. So you have a solid business plan. If you feel like you have a really great plan and a really great idea and other people are telling you the same thing and it's foolproof, it goes back to that same piece, is that you can't succeed without failing, or you can't succeed or fail without trying. So it's really important, if you have a good plan and you've mitigated some of the risk, to actually be able to execute on that plan. Now, I want to touch on number 4 a little bit, and I'll touch on it a little bit later, but this was when I was in the lending space, this was the biggest obstacle for a lot of people. It's really important to at least understand where you currently are with your credit score and what your credit standing looks like. And then if you do need to make improvements or changes to your credit score, it usually takes about 6 to 12 months to remediate it. So it's really important, I encourage everybody today, if you don't know what your credit score is, go and check it out. And then if it is poor, where you don't feel like you would get approved for financing. So generally, if your credit score is below 700, it's unlikely that you'll get approved. So if your credit score is below 700, I would encourage you to reach out to your bank or the Credit Council of Canada and chat with them and see why your credit score is so low. This is, like I mentioned, the only way to get out of a poor credit score when it comes to financing is to be able to offer some sort of personal collateral or personal guarantees if you were to default on the loan. So essentially what they say is you're going to have to put up 30% of the cost of the loan for the money that I'm giving you because your credit is poor. And we are going to take that if you default on this loan and are unable to pay it back. So long story short, I encourage everybody to check out their credit score and see where their current credit standing actually is. These are some of the fundraising stages in business. So the seed stage is the initial funding sought out by startups to develop a concept. It usually comes from angel investors, or it can be from friends and family, or it can also just be your own money that you've collected over time. Then there's the early stage financing. This is, Series A, Series B rounds. It's usually used to scale the business, provided by venture capital firms. And then later stage financing, it's usually Series C, is for the expansion and may even involve those private equity firms or public market investors through an IPO. So the seed stage, the business is typically in that ideation phase and is seeking funding to support research and development, or maybe even to build a prototype. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the seed stage piece, because a lot of the time so I'll take a step back. There's very few organizations who will finance seed stage businesses. One of them is Futurepreneur Canada that will actually do it, but they won't finance research and development. So seed stage becomes challenging, and that's usually why you see venture cap angel investors who say, "I'll give you this money because I believe that this idea that you've come up with, this business plan, is valuable." But it's very difficult to go to a bank and say, "I have this idea and this plan, but I don't have a prototype and I haven't made any revenue." And it's very unlikely that they'll actually approve you for a fixed term loan or any kind of financing. So there are programs out there. I'll talk about some of them later, but it's important to consider that this is why it's usually angel investors or personal investment. So I mentioned personal savings, friends, and family, and then it can be used for market research, product development, IP or intellectual property, and also building out your team. And then some seed investors, especially those angel investors, might be able to provide some valuable advice and connections that would help you actually grow and succeed moving forward. The early stage is a little bit different. Usually you'll have that prototype or launch a product or service, and really you're just looking for funding to support the growth and expansion. Again, Futurepreneur, for example, is a great way to obtain this financing. But at this stage, usually early stage, you can go to a bank and get a small business loan. Not every financial institution is going to do it, but some financial institutions will. Other ones like Business Development Canada or BDC are going to require, I think, at least 2 years of revenue generation in order to qualify. So that you're going to be more in that kind of later stage financing. Again, it can be angel investors, venture capitalists, or crowdfunding platforms. Crowdfunding platforms are actually unique as well, because it used to just be Kickstarter, but there's a couple Canadian ones that are coming out as well. And they're a really great opportunity if you, not necessarily as service-based businesses, but product-based businesses, have a really great opportunity and a high likelihood of being successful on crowdfunding platforms. You can scale your operations, building the team, marketing and advertising, or acquiring customers. And sometimes these early stage investors will also provide strategic guidance and connections to help your business grow. So think of it almost like you're not just getting an investor or financing, but you're also getting some mentorship. The later stage of the financing is usually when you've already achieved some sort of significant growth, and you're seeking funding to actually scale your operations. Or, for example, like we mentioned, you might be preparing for an exit. So Business Development Canada is a great one for this, so that they offer kind of debt financing. I think they call themselves the Business Bank of Canada, but financial institutions will usually step in at this point. You could also still go the venture capitalist route and the private equity firms, all that kind of stuff. And then really it's if you're going into new markets, or you're acquiring businesses, improving tech, or really you're going for that initial public offering or some sort of acquisition. These investors, they may provide the industry expertise or strategic guidance. Some organizations like Futurepreneur, like I mentioned, they wouldn't necessarily be later stage, but they'll also pair the financing or the money with some sort of mentorship as well. So there's a number of different options for some guidance down the road. Okay, so really there's two types of funding that I wanted to touch on: dilutive and non-dilutive funding. Now, dilutive funding, the easiest way to describe it is that you're essentially selling ownership in the business in exchange for some sort of funding. This is usually a good option for businesses that need a large amount of capital and are willing to give up some control in exchange for the funding. Now, non-dilutive funding, it doesn't involve selling any ownership in the business, and it may be a good option for businesses that want to retain control. This type of funding, and this is kind of a blanket statement, so I just want to say it with a little asterisk, is that funding typically comes with more stringent eligibility requirements. It makes it sound like there's a bunch of obstacles. It's just in comparison to the dilutive funding. Now, one thing that I will say in terms of the pros and cons, we'll go through pros and cons next, so I'll actually keep that. But really, the types of dilutive financing are equity financing. So essentially, like I mentioned, you're going to sell a portion of the company to the investor in exchange for funds. Those investors actually become stakeholders in the business, and they're usually entitled to a portion of the profits or are actually involved in the decision-making process. There's the crowdfunding platform. So this usually results in raising a bunch of money from people through people digitally on the internet. But the way it works is that every time somebody contributes to your business, they actually end up with some sort of reward or stake in the company. Now, I think the biggest difference between equity financing and crowdfunding is the crowdfunding type of platforms, they don't give any decision making to people in the business. So they'll own a percentage or they'll have a small ownership in the business, but they won't allow any decision making to people who contribute. Venture capital involves investing in early stage companies with high growth potential. It's usually in exchange for a stake in the company, and they typically have a hands-on approach in helping the company grow. Generally, this is actually, equity financing or sorry, not equity, actually equity financing shows up too. Equity financing and venture capital is usually what you see in shows like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den. They're going to give you some money. They either want, a percentage in royalties or they're going to actually be involved in the business. Then there's angel investing, where they usually provide funding on the early stage companies in exchange for equity, but it's usually smaller amounts than VCs, and they're usually involved in the mentoring and advising in the company. So instead of saying, I have ownership in this company, I want control of the decision making, they're more, I'm going to give you some money because they believe in the product and they just want to be able to help you actually scale and grow your business. Now, there's pros and cons to dilutive funding. I think the pro is that you can usually get access to significant capital. Another one is that you actually have expertise and networks that are available to you. And then you also mitigate some of your risk because you're not taking on all the financing on your own. Somebody else is giving you the money and they're taking ownership in the business, which mitigates some of your risk. Now, some of the cons is you lose your ownership. I will say that I usually don't encourage people to go to dilutive funding first, because it's once you give up that ownership in your company, it's not something you ever get back. So it's really important that if you're at a point where you're considering dilutive funding, that you've exhausted all other opportunities, or there really is no other choice no other choice but to do this moving forward. So that loss of ownership is a con. The pressure to perform is another one. Often investors want to see a return on their investment. And then some of the deals can be quite complex. So it's negotiating those terms. It's actually with shows again like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, it's the easiest one to compare it to. A lot of those deals that are actually made on television don't go through because when they get into the nitty-gritty details of the contract, they don't end up working out. Now, there's a number of ways that you could find dilutive financing through Canada. Now, before I share some of these, the reality is that sometimes you have to, and actually the first one was network and connect. This is the first thing you need to do. You can go to Google, you can go to AI chatbots like ChatGPT, you can go to LinkedIn and do some research. I think it's really important to network and connect to find the right person, not just the money. I find it's generally easy to find the money. It's hard to find the right people that are bringing the money that you actually want to build a business with moving forward. You can actually seek out VC or angel investor firms. There's a couple different groups throughout Canada that do it. You can also explore government support. Some of them offer equity-based financing options. You can consider equity crowdfunding. In Canada, one of them is called Front Funder. In the States, it's Kickstarter. Utilizing convertible instruments, essentially the way this works is you essentially give somebody a ticket that says, if you do this, I will then convert this ticket into a certain percentage of ownership moving forward. So for example, if you're starting up a business and you want to give ownership to somebody in exchange for them developing, let's say, a mobile app for you, you can say that I'll give you a certain percentage of ownership, but each ticket that I give you is going to be converted after 1 year, and every ticket is worth, 5%. So you would say that I'll give you 15% of the company, but I'm going to give it to you over 3 years. And the first convertible note will give you 5%. The second will give you another 5%, and then the third will give you another 5%. So it's just kind of a way to say that, if you're actually going to say that you're going to stick with me and you believe in the company and you're going to help me do the work, I'm going to give you this future ownership in this convertible ticket moving forward. And then participating in pitch opportunities. I think this is one that's overlooked a lot of the time is you have to understand your business and you have to be able to pitch to other people. There's a lot of angel investors and VC pitch opportunities. So I think really checking out some of those is a good way to do it. I listed one online. It's an online platform called AngelList. So definitely take a look at that as well. Now, um, I think that last slide was wrong. It was. Okay. So that was my apologies. So these are actually the popular dilutive financing. So the VC firms, like I mentioned, BDC Capital, OMERS Ventures, and Real Ventures. Angel Investors is another one, like I mentioned. So one of them is called Angel Forum. That one's popular in Canada. Business Development Canada, they do the equity-based financing, like I mentioned. Government equity programs. Some government agencies will do it. So the WEDC fund is really popular right now. They're really focused on Western Canada. And then there's the public markets. So it's actually going to IPO. So it's essentially saying that you're going to let the general public purchase shares in your company moving forward. And then finding corporate investors too. Sometimes there's just large companies that want to invest in smaller companies, whether it's due to some sort of innovative tech, innovative system or process. So finding those corporate investors can be really important as well. So types of diluted financing. There's non-diluted financing. There's the debt financing. So like I mentioned, you go to the bank, they give you a fixed term loan. You could also do lines of credit here as well. So they essentially say that there's a portion of money that's available to you if you need it, but you don't need to use it. It's just available and there if you do. Bootstrapping is my favorite one and probably the most popular is everything that you make goes back into the business to help you scale and grow moving forward. Grants are given to a business, usually federally or provincially backed programs. They're usually given to a business and they don't need to be repaid, which is really nice. And then there's revenue-based financing, which essentially is an investor saying that they'll give you funding in exchange for a percentage of the company's revenue. So this is that royalty-based piece that I was mentioning. So every time you sell a product, they take 5%. This is actually really popular with some of the point of sale systems out there as well. So finding the non-dilutive financing, research government grants and programs. There's a platform that's actually BC based called Pocketed. Pocketed is a paid platform that allows you to research all the government grants available. Business incubators and accelerators. So the Canadian Technology Accelerator is just one of them. Competitions and contests, like I mentioned, those pitch competitions, they come up quite a bit. They're a really great opportunity to be in the right room with a number of different investors and fellow entrepreneurs to connect with. Strategic partnerships and collaboration. So this often happens where actually it's very similar to what V2RF and how Hive work together, and then also V2RF and how they work with Futurepreneur as well. So not everybody can do everything, and so I think it's important to partner with other people who might be able to fill some of your gaps. Bootstrapping and revenue generation, like I mentioned, all the money that goes into the business isn't pulled out and paid, but it actually goes back and invests right back into it. And then non-dilutive loans and debt financing. This is quite common with banks. You go to the bank, you say, I need a certain amount of money. They give it to you. They don't take any equity, and then you usually just have to pay them interest. So these are just some Canadian programs that are popular in the non-dilutive space. So the SRED tax credit is quite popular. The Canadian Small Business Financing Program, this is usually offered through the big 4 or 5 financial institutions, but it's a fixed term loan that would be available for you. Futurepreneur Canada, like I mentioned, mentors entrepreneurs age 18 to 39 that want to start their business. WEBC is Women's Enterprise Center in British Columbia. They provide resources, support, and assistance to women entrepreneurs and business owners. The IRAP program is really common for tech. The Strategic Innovation Fund is a federal program that supports R&D projects. It's usually in innovative sectors, so think agriculture is really popular right now. Sustainability is popular right now. Those are just kind of some areas that they focus on. And the Canadian Media Fund is actually a really popular one as well. They've done a really great job of supporting media throughout Canada, specifically the film industries. So there are a number of grants available in that area. Okay. So these are some of the pros and cons of non-dilutive funding. So the biggest pro is that you keep all your ownership. This usually simplifies decision making when there aren't so many people trying to make decisions within the company. There's often no repayment obligations. So it really depends. For the grants, you don't have to pay them back, but if it's a fixed term loan, you're actually going to have to pay them back. And then it's flexible. It keeps business decision making quite simple. There's no investor expectations or equity dilution concerns. Now, the reality is that you're going to have limited funding with this type of with the non-dilutive funding. It's usually a competitive application process for the grants, so you're not going to be the only one that's applying for these grants and subsidies, and usually the amounts that are available are limited. And there's a lack of expertise. So really the biggest thing is that you're missing out on matching with one of those big investors that would be able to provide some experience and expertise. Okay. Now this is probably one of the biggest, I think one of the biggest pieces of starting your own business or finding financing for your business. So you have to know what your personal credit score is. Like I said, this is the biggest holdup for pretty much any financing option outside of the government grants and loans. You also have to understand the debt and financial obligations. So understanding what your personal debt load is, or your debt to equity ratio, it can be really challenging to secure any business financing or any personal financing if you don't understand what your debt to equity ratio is. Having some savings and emergency funds. So making sure that you have some sort of cushion that if the business gets in a tight spot, you're still able to take care of yourself in your personal life. Understanding what your sustenance number is and actually budgeting. Your sustenance number is the minimum amount of money you need at the end of the month in order to survive. So taking care of your food, your clothing, your shelter, all of the bare necessities that you just need in order to survive. So knowing what that sustenance number is and actually budgeting allows you to determine how much risk you can actually take in your business. Tax implications is another piece as well. Is your business, the way your business is structured or you're registered is going to dictate what kind of tax implications you actually have. So this is missed a lot of the time. People collect money, they don't put away any money for taxes, and then at the end of the year when they're actually filing their taxes, they owe a bunch of money and they can't come up with it. So it's really important to understand that. And then asset protection is another one. Is you want to know that if the business starts to experience challenges, that your personal assets aren't going to be impacted because of it as well. So if the business were to go bankrupt, you want to make sure that your personal assets are separate from the business to make sure that you actually have something if the business were to go under. Okay, so I know that was a lot to go through, and I also think everybody was muted the entire time. I didn't have the chance to check the chat, but I know we have about 7 minutes or so left. So I really wanted to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions. Rebecca, I'm not sure if you want to do it in the chat or if you want to encourage everybody to unmute themselves, but I'll let you give some direction.
Yeah, sure. So, actually, anyone who wants to unmute to ask some questions, feel free to do that. But you can also ask it in the chat, in whatever works best for you. Like I said at the beginning too, if you don't feel comfortable asking that question publicly, you can also private message me, and then I'll ask it on your behalf. But as we're waiting for some questions to come in, there's some people who kind of shared their businesses or like the businesses that they're aspiring to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just read those off as we're waiting for some questions. So Sylvia said that she's has a nonprofit which supports women in at-risk situations. And then Winnie was talking about some of the mentees that she has as part of the mentorship program that she has. She is in part of, and one of her mentees has a business in old photo development and repair, and another one of her mentees has a business that offers math education through an app to homeschool students and parents.
And I guess while I wait, because everybody's really quiet, I think the questions don't necessarily have to revolve around financing. Obviously, I'm a small to medium-sized business owner. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I'm happy to answer any questions around entrepreneurship or financing if you have them. So I guess now's your chance.
Benjamin, this is
Yeah.
me. I just like you to put your contact information to show on the screen. So in that way, everybody can have it if they need to contact you because
Okay.
you shared lots of information, which is really helpful. And there's
Mm-hmm.
several areas I don't even know, and even I am quite into
Yeah.
the entrepreneur realm, but there's several areas you're sharing. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, intriguing for me. And I'm thinking later on when we have more competitions or pitch contest, and they're going to have more, like people have great ideas they wanted to create.
Hmm.
Right now, we're getting a lots of new members coming into our organization. They're asking if we can connecting them with somebody understand how to start a business in Canada. Some wants
Hmm.
to do e-commerce, and some probably wanted to open up like a company or a store or something locally. So people need to contact you to scan this code then.
Yeah, you can just scan this and then I've linked it to my LinkedIn profile. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me right now, and then see if I can get you connected with whoever it is or whatever it is that you need, and then we can always connect by email after. But if you scan this code, it should take you to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to send me a connect, and I'm happy to connect on there as well.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No problem. And I think just chatting or just touching on what Winnie had mentioned, that's probably the hardest part about putting a presentation like this together. Is the reality is that financing your business, once you find the right program, no, it's actually, it's not even simple once you find the right program. It's still, I guess it's simple, but it's not easy. And you could see even when you go, if you were to go back to um, the types of, I gotta find this slide here. It was the types of dilutive and non-dilutive fundings. I originally had a tree. Like there's 5 types of investing right here. So it's really hard to dictate in terms of dilutive financing. If you are ready to give up a portion of your company, it's really hard to try and figure out what the best fit for you is. And I think that's what Winnie had mentioned as well, that it's really important to chat with people who have some experience doing it. And so I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn if you guys have any questions or concerns. Nobody has any questions? I feel like
I
I
mean,
just shared so much
it's Noah.
information.
It's
Oh, hey
Noah.
Noah.
How are you? I haven't talked to you in a while. It's been
Good,
a
thanks.
couple months.
Yeah, how are you
I
doing?
guess I've been good. I guess I have a quick question about your
Sure.
business. Like, is Hive a consulting firm? Is that essentially what your business is? Like, I couldn't really like hear what you were saying before. I didn't follow, so
That's
I
okay.
just want to kind of ask. Yeah,
Yeah, so we offer I try and stay away from the consulting
yeah.
arm of it just because of the reputation I think it has a lot of the time. But I work with companies on developing marketing and business assessments. So we go in, we look at the company top down. They're usually experiencing some sort of challenges or some sort of growth problems. We do a full assessment. I work with them to develop a strategy. Some
Hmm.
people want to take the strategy and then just execute it on their own. Other
Yeah.
businesses want me to come on almost as like a fractional COO. So it's kind of a cheaper way if they need a chief operations
Hmm.
position. It's a cheaper way to bring me on as a contractor as opposed to bringing me on as an employee and then all the taxes that's involved with it. So that
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
happens, but Hive actually started with lead generation and partnerships. So once the assessment and the strategic development's done, we also help companies support companies with the outreach. So actually bringing customers through the door or creating
Yeah.
partnerships that might be mutually beneficial for 2 groups.
That's awesome. Okay, that's the only
Thanks, Noah.
question I had. Yeah,
Okay.
no worries.
Thank
Okay,
you for your time, Benjamin. I
no
know
problem.
all of us are busy, but you're willing to
Yeah.
do this, and we're hoping in the future not only sending more business to you, but more get your consultation as an advisor
Yeah.
to
No,
yeah.
and Winnie, you know my dedication to be able to help a lot of the people that are in the room today. And I think just because we spoke to market research, if everyone's comfortable, I'm interested to hear from you. Is you've already shared whether you're a business owner or that you actually have a business idea, but I'm curious, and you can pop this into the chat. My feelings won't be hurt, but I'm curious, would you find value in connecting with somebody in our network one-on-one for whatever business problems you're having? And then the second piece is that if I'm able to get you connected with the right resource, are you willing to actually pay to do that? Or is it a service that you would actually hope to get for free? And this is part of, I'm not offering anything right now. Everybody has my LinkedIn. If you have any questions or concerns, like free of charge, feel free to reach out to me. But I'm just curious because this was a big obstacle in my last role with offering free consultations. And so I'm curious, is it something where you'd actually consider value in purchasing an hour session, being able to work with somebody in the network to consult with them?